that we also do so by paying homage of the sacrifices made, but also perhaps understanding the meaning of this freedom that they died for, and whether we take it for granted and whether we betray them or we live up to what they died for. And I think this is the day that we should feel as we are somehow have a patriotic obligation to never ever betray those that lay their lives in a manner that you have described.
Gentlemen, there is a general concern that enough is not being done in the sense of marking this day, and the question is, why is the interest waning over the years? I remember when we were much more younger, it used to be a very, very big deal. There used to be events organized. You know, there were field trips to the museum to make us better understand what this day was all about. What is your opinion on that?
I think that's true. I don't know whether interest is waning or whether we have just simply never been able to create a national consciousness around an important day as Cassinga Day. I suspect that we may have erred in the past. We may have appropriated the day for expediency's sake, and in the process we may have alienated others. And so just it's almost just a natural flow that ultimately interest may wane as far as the importance of the day. In fact, if you think about today, you ask yourself what was so significant about our commemoration of this day, or was it simply a private and a personal affair? Is that what commemoration of Cassinga Day and the lives lost, the sacrifices that Dr. Ngurare was just referring to, had come to?
Yeah, I think the Reverend has touched on that, and I believe that if the national consciousness is awakened, and we begin to understand that the sacrifices for this day and those who died, it was for our freedom, then I think it behooves on all of us to ensure that we live up to that. Now, but I would say, listening to how you phrase your question, is very important. If we look at the phraseology of whether it is waning, Rashi Hama has done a good job, I think, in articulating it in a lyric where he sings to it, and from time to time we remember this day when we listen to that lyric. Now, I believe that the offsprings of a free and independent Namibia, of course, you and I, maybe we were there before 1989, but there are a great deal of young people born in a free and independent Namibia who probably would not really understand the same way you and I understand the significance that we should attach or affix to this day. And therefore, if there is some form of waning, it then means that there is something we are not doing right. So we have got then to, I think, come in and begin to understand, why is it waning? For instance, we have all these young people here. Some of them are graduates. Some of them are young professionals like yourself. Some of them are employed. Some of them are unemployed. Now, quite diverse offsprings of a free and independent Namibia. So what is it that we are doing to get them around the table, to get them to the consciousness that they should be able to relate, that if I'm from Varambat, for instance, I should be able to celebrate Cassinga. Why am I celebrating it? If I'm from Epokiro, why is it that I should be celebrating? If I'm from Sibinda, why is it I should be celebrating? If I'm from Okangwati, why is it that I should be celebrating? And I think that national discourse around this day and why it was at least made to be celebrated, every one of us should have an emotional attachment to it, as it were. And I think if we do that, investing in the young, talented, either now musicians or young people who want to make movies out of it, that's what Hollywood is about. Vietnam and all these other wars. We are now ending up actually appreciating others and not ourselves. So that is what I would add to what our Reverend has said.
In our previous episode, we had a very interesting discussion around the media's role in creating a conducive environment for intergenerational discourse. Growing up, going to the village, what I always enjoyed was the late nights around the fire when my grandfather would sit there, and the words that would always catch my attention is, "Let me tell you a story." And I would just pick up because I knew it was going to be something interesting. That was the way we were taught. Proverbs were passed on. Oral history was the way of us learning from our past. Are we perhaps not having enough intergenerational discussions in terms of days that are as important as Cassinga and other days as well?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I just think that, you know, do not lament the advancements in technology. We should embrace it in a way that it helps us. Much of what we know substantively are what we have learned from our parents and our grandparents. It at times may feel that these wonderful institutions that we had gone to, they are the ones who had deposited all the maybe knowledge, but perhaps not intelligence and wisdom. So I totally agree with you. But I also think, I also want to challenge those who are a bit younger than me to find ways how we can employ technology and the advancements therein to recapture that link between generations, because that's so precious.
Dr. Ngurare, just before we check out our social media comments.
Yeah, I think the Reverend is correct. In fact, if I, with your indulgence, if I would say that Christianity, for instance, the Christians are not always agreeable on everything. They certainly have differences. But I think Christians, I have not at least seen that much where Christians are protesting to demand amendment of the 10 Commandments, either to be 11 or to be 9. Now, the point I'm saying is that regardless of what their differences are, there are certain aspects of them that is a common denominator around which they are united come whatever season. Now, the same, I think, is true here. In terms of us being able to define perhaps how are we going to be able to gravitate towards events like Cassinga and many others, as you have said, we should be able to define as a nation what is it that unites us, what is it that put us together. In other political terms, maybe we call it national interest, national security. What are those attributes? And I think once we find that, events such as Cassinga, we can be able to bequeath it to generations after us with some certainty that, in fact, the foundation has been laid and now we can move forward with confidence. Now, if the foundation is not that strong, well, we might be shaky, but I am confident that, for instance, in 1989, when the founding president announced the policy of national reconciliation, it is to him that we looked, it's to him that we, because we were quite uncertain. What is this independence? 32 years on, are we going to get there? Is he really telling it as it is? But he was able to take from each section of society, and he made a team, and a team which then took us across, and at least to lay that foundation. So we look to the leadership of the country to be able then to meet the society openly, having these discussions, so that people can pave a way forward, and maybe practically beyond lip service and words that we just pay.
Now, as a culture and situation critical, we asked your share, or rather your opinion, via social media on whether we as a nation have done enough to recognize those who sacrificed their lives for Namibia's independence. And let's take a look at what some of you had to say. with Benji Rinjonya Kachimune, I beg your pardon, and he says whoever came up with the recognition did his part, even though some are left behind in the massacre such as the War of National Resistance, the 1904 to 1908 battle between the Germans and the Hereros, where thousands lost their lives. As per my observation, it's not recognized at all. That is where the whole peer of nationalists begin. So as a nation, we must try by all means to recognize and appreciate all the massacres. Lee Garissa says, first and foremost, what are we commemorating? Because the whole truth regarding this event remains that since isolated voices started to cry foul over the colloquial narrative, to date many questions remain unanswered and no platform is created to discuss what really happened. To answer the question, our history needs to be weighed against the voices of those who do not agree with the SWAPO version of events. It is only then that we can truly talk of national reconciliation. Until such time, national reconciliation will remain in the propaganda speeches of politicians, and in essence it doesn't exist, she says. Blom agrees with Mozengwa, who says exactly, and it's not only about Cassinga's massacre. There were people tortured by the same people in dungeons in Lubango, and we need to know where those people's corpses are buried. Lastly, Nathaniel Nathan says, don't say we as a nation. Ask SWAPO that question, because everything belongs to them in this country, even the national flag, according to Nathan. Those were some of the views shared by you on social media. Reverend Doctor, what do you make of these cage-rattling statements? Some of them are controversial. What do you have to say?
No, I think I'm just happy that people have the freedom to express their opinions, their views. They may not necessarily be correct, but that's not the point. The point is that it helps with an important conversation. I do agree that today is Cassinga Day, but the issue of national reconciliation is much broader than Cassinga Day. And I understand that Cassinga Day provides a wonderful opportunity for us to reflect on it, but we need to locate it, we need to contextualize it in this broader sense. Otherwise we may tend to be nationalistic in the way that we look at national reconciliation. But I think it's all those comments have value. They need to interrogate it, but they have value.
I see Doc has a smirk on his face.
Well, I come back to what I said. Whose blood waters our freedom? That's how we sing it.
Yeah.
And the definition of that freedom, prior to 1989, we did not have a constitution, which we now do. And that constitution, of course, was written with the participation of Namibians, imperfect as it may be, but it's our supreme law of the land. Part of the freedom that is articulated in there is the freedom of expression, freedom of thought. So it is good for people to be able to express themselves the way they're expressing themselves, without them being followed or being imprisoned for that freedom. And I think it is precisely that. Those who died so that we can be able to agree to disagree on many issues, including whether or not we have reconciliation, which is reconciliation. My view is that we have political reconciliation, which has maybe brought what we now see. We can hoist our flag, we can sing our anthem, etc. But I think we have not made a lot of inroads on what I would term economic reconciliation. So, and I think that's the crux of the matter. You remember, I referred to the offspring of the free and independent Namibia. These are the many young people, percentage-wise, which are, I think that percentage is higher than those who are a bit edging closer to the sunset of their lives. So we have to be able then to understand this sort of reconciliation, the economic reconciliation? Are we using perhaps this constitution to be able to bring equality in access to the resources, or is it not? And if it is not, then the whole narrative of whether or not we are reconciled, it is out there. And what I say or what he says is not the sacred position on it. Other people have a view of it. But I think it is work in progress, in my view.
That line from our national anthem, "Whose blood waters our freedom," reminds me of a little story that happened in my life.
Yeah.
My parents decided to send me to a previously all-white school at that time. The school is called HTS, Hoërtechnische School. And we had an assignment to hand in the next Monday. And one of the boys said, "No, but it's a public holiday next week." And the teacher, an Afrikaner man, said, well, he looked very confused. He said, "What public holiday?" And then said, "No, it's Independence Day." He said, "What?" In Afrikaans, he said, "Nee, it's a publieke vakantiedag," which basically translates to, "It's your public holiday." I didn't think much of it at that time. But then I think back, but why would he say such a thing if we're all Namibians?
Yes.
And then the question again, when you say "whose blood waters our freedom," you must remember at that time, one man's freedom fighter was another man's terrorist, and vice versa.
Yes.
So how do you answer that question?
So I'm not convinced that that we have reconciliation. I don't believe that it's government's sole purpose and sole responsibility to ensure and to work towards national reconciliation. Whenever we speak about national reconciliation, fingers are always pointing at the government. But it's all of our responsibility. I do think that the government took a very, very strong position, but a necessary position, by declaring a policy of national reconciliation. So soon after independence, we were there. But it remains a dream. It remains a concept that we are searching for. Reconciliation is a theological concept. It's not just a simple word or a simple phrase or whatever. It's deeply biblical, and I can speak about it when you allow me to do so. Because you cannot speak about reconciliation without speaking about forgiveness. Yet they are two different constructs. Forgiveness is a command. We are commanded by God to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't require reciprocity. It doesn't require that the other person should accept that. But it requires from you to forgive. Reconciliation is different. Because reconciliation is God's way of reconciling a broken world with God's self. And we take that concept and appropriate it now in the human sphere. And what it means is that even when you extend forgiveness, even when you extend the need and the requirement to reconcile, there need to be a response to that. That's the only way that you can reconcile. And I think that's where we still lack, even 32 years later.